Hello, I'm Anna Byrne, one of the founding members of Cheltenham UK Philosophers, introducing part one of Everything is Alive by Matt Gray.
Hey guys, a few things I wanted to sort of get off my chest, and I think that the only way to do it is to just have a bit of a ramble. I think that's kind of what works for me. Sometimes I try and sort of sit down and systematically work out a model. Sometimes it just has to kind of, I don't know, just evolve, perhaps. So what I want to talk about is this idea of life going all the way down, right? And sort of think about some of the implications for that, and sort of life and cognition. This basal cognition thing that sort of Michael Levin's exploring. This idea that even really, really simple kind of sorting algorithms and things like that could be said to have possibly things like delayed gratification and kind of almost making decisions as though there's some sort of cognition going on there, even in ridiculously basic sorting algorithms, right? And there's this other, there's obviously the problem of abiogenesis. So, where did this kind of organic stuff come from when most of the other stuff seems to be just kind of like dead, mechanically rendered sort of materials that just sort of follow basic rules of chemistry and physics and so on. So, I mean, for me, I think kind of reality is kind of like a stick of rock, right, that says cognition all the way down. And so there is nothing which is not involved in life. So the universe is life, right? And every single bit of it is involved in that dance. And so, we could point to a bunch of stones on the side of a rock and say, well, that's not life. But, even the common sense view of it can see how intrinsically linked they are. With, they might be covered in moss. There might be a rock fall that disturbs some soil that creates an opening for sort of photons to get into some certain materials which cause, which promote certain plant life or something like that. They're totally, there's nothing on this planet that isn't involved in the activity of life. And you might say, well, imagine a world where there's no animals, no insects, and so on and so forth. Well, I would say that system is still milling about with the potential for producing these more complex forms, right? So it's kind of a little bit like the reductionist. If you think about the reductionist program, that you sort of start at the top with these kind of super intelligent things, kind of like us, or maybe you could take something like Gaia, like sort of see that as a single organism, and you keep drilling and drilling and drilling. And I'm saying that those things that look like inorganic life are just part of the substrate, or they're part of the same continuum that life is in. And I would say that life is the thing that's causing all of this, right? And this squares obviously with idealism, because metabolism and so on are supposed to be the appearances of dissociated alters within a sort of field of subjectivity. So for me, that field of subjectivity is kind of the sort of sum total of all things which are, and here and there are kind of eddies of it that sort of organise themselves into metaconscious persisting forms such as ourselves. But we are not disconnected from anything else around or beneath or above or below us, right? So we're like the leaves on the tree. I mean, you look at the tree and you could say, well, that hard wood stuff doesn't move much, does it? It's those leaves and the flowers and things like that, that sort of seem to express the livingnessness or the lovelinessness of that tree, right? But we don't say, well, the trunk's not alive, right? And we can't even see the roots, and we don't say they're not relevant or alive or involved. And so where does the tree really end? Think about it this way. You say, well, there's the tree, there's a distinct object, you can pull it out of the ground. But really, it doesn't really stop there, does it? Because the whole of that expression, which is the tree, that sort of occasion, if you like, it's sucking up minerals from the ground, right? So there's a continuity there. So that tree extends into the ground, into the soil, into the and so there's this kind of form there, sort of dotted line to sheldrake, perhaps. There's this form of the tree that sort of pulls all of these surrounding sort of materials into that form, right? So those materials aren't separate from the tree, right? In fact, you could say that the whole fucking planet, the whole universe around that tree is still that tree, because it couldn't survive without it, right? So again, it's the sort of stick of rock thing. It doesn't matter where you look on the stick of rock, there's continuity in both directions, right? And and it says cognition, maybe consciousness, all the way down. I mean, this is where it gets into sort of slightly muddy waters. I think that pantheists could sort of leap on this and say, well, hang on, this sounds like what we're saying. Sorry, panpsychists, right? Because they would say, well, yeah, we're claiming that there's this consciousness in absolutely everything. So there's a certain amount of a sort of field of consciousness around a particle, for example. They'd say, well, that would potentially explain why things are organised into these forms, because perhaps there's a certain amount of directive will or cognition within those particles, and the dance of the collection of all of those individual particles results in this beautifully sort of choreographed thing that we call life. Okay, but I'm saying something slightly different than that. I think I'm saying that we're still one mind, and within that mind, and this is kind of like a new metaphor I've come up with for thinking about this, because it seems to work beautifully. If you think about it's like a drop of water, right, sort of dissociating from a larger body of water, maybe due to conditions, say gravity or something like that, a little portion of a blob of liquid slowly starts kind of falling off the main mass, and then you can see this thread, and it's almost like this little drop sort of twists itself off the main mass, right, for whatever reason. And in the same sense, you look at sort of things like black holes, they seem to twist themselves off space, right? Bubbles seem to twist themselves into being from sort of surrounding materials and other bubbles and so on. In fact, you could think of a honeycomb formation, right? Actually, we'll get to that in a minute. So there's this kind of sort of twisting off. So that little droplet of water is twisted off from the main body of water, but it is nevertheless made of exactly the same stuff. And indeed, for a while, there's a kind of thin sort of thread of fluid connecting the two until it pops and gravity takes over and it's completely dissociated. But that wouldn't stop it from being reassociated if there was suddenly a gust of wind from beneath or something and then pushed the drop. That same material could then easily be reassociated with water. So I think what I'm saying is that what we're seeing with life are sort of very complex kind of compound twistings off, right? Sort of dissociating from the main kind of bubble of Mal. And in doing that twisting off, you create this non-traversable sort of channel between the two, that really, really thin connection between the droplets, for example. And again, you get these, you end up with these kind of boundary lines, which, very Markovian. And again, I think, okay, let's go back to the honeycomb model. If you look at the sort of honeycomb, or like those complex compound bubbles that you get, or even sort of hypercubes and things like that, you can see these kind of spaces expanding and collapsing. They're distinct for a while, then they're non-distinct, and sort of what happens to that space when that twisting gets untwisted? It just gets sort of repositioned back into the main bubble, right, or into the main space. So I think that's what's going on with minds, and when you take things like psychedelics, or you have this sort of or you're knocked out, near-death experiences, and so on and so forth. For me, what's going on there is that you're untwisting, right? So in fact, actually, I think a good metaphor is, those balloon animals at the fairground, they sort of twist a bit of the balloon, and then for a while you've got this kind of space that there is no continuum between that bubble and the rest of the balloon. Then you untwist it, and then it returns. That's a really, really good analogy for this, I think, because I think that's what's kind of going on, that we are a collection of all of these little twists. And seems to be this kind of points towards some of the free energy principle stuff from Friston. He's talking about this extraordinarily basic kind of set of dynamics that exist, the low at all scales, right? So you can have backward and forward sort of tracing, or up and downward scaling of these influences, right? So you can have kind of a lower scale, behaving in such ways that it influences a medium scale, and the medium scale then takes on some sort of dynamic of its own, and can kind of down propagate or up propagate to a different layer, and so on and so forth. But the point is that underneath all of this are these extraordinarily basic dynamics, which tend towards these sort of persisting forms, these kind of homeostatic Markovian sort of entities, if you like, with a distinct film between them and surrounding entities. And so this honeycomb, this conscious agents network, all of these different views seem to be kind of pointers to this one idea, and that's of this collection of temporarily distinct entities, but then that can just melt back into the main continuum. And so, yeah, I think that's what's kind of going on. But for me, those twistings, even though I sort of see a Lego brick on the floor, that is some kind of a twisting for me. There is a persisting form there. There's a little bit of mal that's kind of organised in such a way so it can persist and be perceived to persist. I don't know what it is. It looks like a sort of, mathematically quite sound, sort of structured, rigorous plastic object, but I don't really know what's there. We know that's just a sort of sensory sort of chunk of qualia, but we don't really know what it is, right? But there is something there, and so for me that is some kind of a twisting. Anyway, I'm not sure I'm making any sense here, but let's test the water on this and see if anyone thinks I'm making any sense. So let's just sort of recap. For me, everything is alive, right? The universe is alive. The universe is mental, right? So it's one big fuck off mind that for some reason, through some sort of perturbance, these ripples that we talk about, is ever evolving new sorts of novelties, novel perspectives, novel persisting forms, and so on and so forth. To what end, nobody knows. But yeah, see if any of this makes any sense. Cheers, folks.